Lucid dreaming presents a fascinating field of exploration, opening doors to self-discovery and personal growth. If you've ever wished to learn how to control your dreams, this information will serve as a valuable guide. The ability to realize you are dreaming while still within the dream is the key characteristic of lucid dreaming. It's not merely about soaring through the skies or conversing with celebrities in a dream world. It's a powerful tool that can stimulate creativity, aid in solving complex problems, and even help overcome deeply rooted fears. Throughout human history, various cultures have recognized and utilized the potential of altered states of consciousness, including dreams. For instance, ancient Egyptians practiced dream incubation for healing and prophetic insights. Shamans worldwide have long entered dream states to gain revelations and connect with the spiritual realm. Even in modern psychology, prominent figures like Carl Jung deeply explored the symbolic language of dreams, viewing it as a path to understanding the unconscious. Scientific research into lucid dreaming is ongoing, but there is already evidence pointing to increased activity in certain brain regions, especially the prefrontal cortex, during lucid states. Methods like mild, mnemonic induction of lucid dreams and WBTB, wake back to bed, are often used to induce lucidity in dreams. The mild method involves setting a clear intention to become aware that you are dreaming just before falling asleep, often combined with regular reality checks throughout the day. WBTB, on the other hand, involves waking up after a few hours of sleep, staying awake briefly, and then falling back asleep, which significantly increases the chances of directly entering REM sleep and, consequently, a lucid dream. While mastering these methods requires significant practice and patience, the potential results can be truly profound. Gaining proficiency in lucid dreaming can lead to a significant increase in self-awareness, improved emotional regulation, and a unique platform for creative self-expression. Just imagine the possibility of practicing a new skill, finding a solution to a complex problem, or even bravely confronting a personal challenge within the safe and boundless confines of your own dream world. It's a journey into the depths of yourself, limited only by the flight of your imagination. Are you ready to unlock the hidden potential of your dreams? Invincible, strong, and fearless. These were the epithets used to describe them in the wise text of medieval romances, penned over 600 years ago. Every secret remained carefully hidden, intertwined with myths and captivating tales. Here, colossal giants, valiant heroes, and terrifying monstrous beasts coexisted with infallible magical weapons, cunning murders, and intricate intrigues. These were narratives of great battles, triumphant victories, heartbreaking dramas, and tragic outcomes. Consider, for example, the legend of King Magnus, who named his axe-like weapon Mel, after the death goddess of a people whose history was marked by two great victories followed by an inevitable decline, the Biths. Mel invariably accompanied the Vikings, symbolizing their indomitable strength and propensity for violence. However, today, archaeological discoveries on the coasts of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway tell a completely different story, revealing them as artists who created genuine masterpieces with incredible skill and sensitivity. They forged not only formidable axes and swords adorned with mysterious inscriptions. Their culture was as contradictory and mysterious as the very life of this northern people. Viking graves were marked by stones arranged in the shape of ship hulls, obvious yet enigmatic, like an alphabet. Runes and rhymes were not merely a form of writing, but powerful incantations and invocations, magic directed towards eternity. The Vikings left us more than just artifacts. They left us their faces, etched into history. But what lies behind these wooden markers? What compelled the Vikings to embark on distant expeditions to discover and conquer new worlds? And why did they suddenly disappear in the 11th century, as if dissolving into the mist of time? At the University of Bonn, researchers are meticulously gathering information about medieval life, striving to reconstruct a picture of that era. Thanks to their efforts, it has been determined that a certain individual, whose remains were found, reached the age of 45, which by the standards of his contemporaries was considered old age. From his remains, particularly a fatal skull wound, scientists can reconstruct his face. This is a long and painstaking process, reconstructing muscles, skin, and hair, a true scientific journey into the past, into a world of cold, endless struggle, and exhausting fatigue. How much can a person's face reveal about their life, about their fate? Who is this man? 1,000 years ago, he roamed the dense forest of Denmark. His life, his survival, was a solitary endeavor. Daily life in medieval Scandinavia was harsh, cold, snow, and meager barley soup. Approximately 2 million people were scattered across the vast northern lands at the beginning of the 8th century. Though their numbers were few, this cold land could barely sustain them. Nevertheless, the population grew rapidly. With each passing day, conflicts escalated, and the desire to seek sustenance in other lands intensified, reaching a critical point. It was then that a technical innovation provided them with such an opportunity. The Viking ship emerged. At the beginning of the 8th century, something unimaginable occurred. They invaded the interior regions of Europe, which was politically weakened after Charlemagne's death. Their ships reached cities via the coasts of England and France, where any resistance was brutally suppressed. Where favorable opportunities arose, they established trade with Rus merchants. Within just a few decades, the Vikings penetrated a world where they were completely unknown, and nothing could stop them. They reached Newfoundland and Canada, forging a path through Iceland and Greenland, proving their invincibility. The territory controlled by the Vikings expanded colossally in the 9th and 10th centuries, encompassing the coast of Denmark, the far north of Norway, Swedish lakes, the Canadian coast, the cliffs of Gibraltar, and even the arid Gobi Desert. Thanks to their unique ships, the entire world lay at their feet. These ships, these seafaring vessels, were true bridges connecting distant continents and sparing travelers from arduous and dangerous overland routes. The vessel itself became the cornerstone of their incredible success. These floating structures were genuine technological masterpieces of the Middle Ages, whose accurate replicas can still be seen in museum exhibitions today. Approaching the ancient oak planks, any visitor could vividly imagine the atmosphere of an old shipyard. The work of splitting a log with a wedge was no easy task. Strike after strike, the plank would split strictly along the grain, forming characteristic cracks. Boards made by this method always retained their original shape, whether dry or wet, and only gained strength over time, making them an ideal material for shipbuilding. Each plank was carefully worked with axes to ensure they fit together perfectly, like the petals of an open fan. The most crucial part of the entire ship's construction lay in a single wedge, the rudder. Building just one such ship required up to 20 mighty oak trees. The entire process involved highly precise manual labor. A ship, like a colossus, could reach speeds of up to 20 kilometers per hour, and with the help of oars, it could be skillfully navigated even against strong currents and headwinds. Wool and other animal furs, treated with tar, reliably ensured the hull's watertightness. Iron rivets provided the necessary stability to the structure. With sincere love and deep respect, the masters completed their creations. Carved animal figures adorning the ships served not only as decoration but also as protective talismans. Without a doubt, the Vikings possessed the most maneuverable and fastest vessels of their era. Their pride and craftsmanship are still felt in the relics of Viking culture. It is no surprise that fish lured them into the boundless seas, especially cod, which to this day dictates the rhythm of life in the northern regions. From January to March, huge shoals of this fish approach the Norwegian coast. This is a time of intense fishing, but also a period of severe cold and numerous dangers, such as the polar night. Even in the summer months, the air temperature here rarely exceeds 12 degrees Celsius. The waters around the Lofoten Islands, north of Norway, are considered a particularly dangerous area. The legendary underwater current, known as the maelstrom, has already cast countless ships onto the rocks. Lofoten fishermen today still practice one of the riskiest professions. They use almost the same tools as their ancestors, a hook, a knife, and a line made from seahorse leather, which, surprisingly, surpasses many modern synthetic analogs in strength. To this day, this work demands a fierce struggle with large fish. Their ancestors had to show extraordinary courage to venture so far from shore. Perhaps even then, they imagined that better lands lay beyond the horizon. For modern scientists, the mystery of how the Vikings maintained their orientation across the vast oceans remains unsolved. This enigma may find its resolution thanks to a small archaeological find housed in the National Museum of Copenhagen. In the section dedicated to Greenland, several small objects discovered during excavations half a century ago are on display. Among them is a small wooden fragment whose significance is actively debated in scientific circles. Some researchers are inclined to consider it merely a button. However, during its reconstruction, unusual markings along the edge, resembling a modern navigational instrument, attract particular attention. Upon closer examination, mathematically precise lines appear on its surface. It is hypothesized that these are markings for determining the sun's position, which would consequently allow for accurate determination of a ship's location in the open sea. It is believed to have been a so-called sun compass. If this theory is confirmed, then the Vikings possessed an ideal navigational tool for crossing the North Atlantic, and this was 1,000 years ago. This revolutionary invention could explain how the Vikings became the most successful seafarers of their era. The compass undoubtedly ensured safe passage to the most distant shores. For centuries, the Vikings honed their seafaring talents through fishing. Now, with their ships fast and reliable, they transformed their hardships into gold, the gold of plunder. In 793, the Vikings launched a daring attack on the wealthy English monastery of Lindisfarne. Just a few months later, they plundered Jarrow Monastery as well. Their simple yet extremely effective strategy involved swift and sudden attacks. They looted stores and treasures, then mercilessly burned down homes. The Vikings established their strongholds, for example, on the Isle of Man. Gold, silver, jewels, and people destined for the slave trade all were taken from conquered territories. Viking raiding parties conducted raids throughout Ireland. As quickly as they appeared, they vanished into the boundless Atlantic, only to return for new conquests. Rivers became golden paths leading them to wealthy cities. Hamburg was plundered. An atmosphere of despair reigned in coastal regions. God protect us from the people of the North. These words, as is known, were famously sung by Martin. Beyond the Rhine, gates to gigantic treasures opened. Never before had the country been gripped by such panic, as a contemporary chronicler wrote. Murmuring rivers and fierce wolves, that's how the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described them. Paris was besieged, its markets devastated. In desperation, the Franks ceded part of their kingdom, Normandy, which to this day bears the name of the people of the North. The Vikings gradually adapted to new conditions. Their leader, Rollo, became a French nobleman. They adopted local food, drank wine, and readily embraced Christianity. The adoption of local customs had significant political influence. As a result of this conquest, 150 years later, Rollo's descendant, William the Conqueror, ascended to the English throne. Yet, the Vikings continued to bravely seek their fortune in other regions. It was almost always internal strife that compelled them to risk their fate in the North Atlantic. This was the case with Eric the Red. He ordered the killing of his influential rivals Vikings and had to flee to the very center of the North Atlantic, 1,500 kilometers to the northwest, in search of lands he had heard about, rumored to be abundant. In 980 AD, Eric the Red and his companions set foot on Icelandic soil. However, the initial euphoria of acquiring new lands must have quickly faded, for before them lay a harsh, barren land, three-quarters covered by lakes and glaciers. Nevertheless, neither the risk of infertile soils, nor the acute scarcity of wood, nor the eternal twilight of the long winter could deter Eric and his brave companions. They established their settlements at the foot of volcanoes, in small but fertile valleys, where they engaged in modest farming and animal husbandry. Life for these men and women, accustomed to a constant struggle for survival, was difficult, yet filled with exciting discoveries. The land itself seemed to speak to them from its depths, and here they felt a touch of infinity. Years later, Iceland began to attract new colonists. Just 80 years after Eric the Red's arrival, the island's population reached 30,000 inhabitants, a number too large for the limited fertile lands. In 1070, famine struck, and the old and infirm were sometimes thrown from cliffs. At communal assemblies, known as things, they had to find a way out of their desperate situation. Unanimously, they concluded that the only solution was the conquest of new lands, pushing further into the North Atlantic. Their path led through storms, salty waters, and ice until they reached the very land that Bjarni Herjolfsson had discovered 3 generations earlier, Greenland. Its first colonizer, Eric the Red, misleadingly named it the Land of Green Meadows. He likely did this to encourage the Icelanders who landed there. Even then, this journey proved insurmountable for many, as only 14 of 25 ships reached their destination. Their primary task was survival in this icy wilderness. Greenland's climate did not permit agriculture, and trees, so essential for wood, were absent. A gigantic ice sheet, 3,400 meters thick, stretched over the land, containing 7 times more water than the North Sea. The few oases of life were located in the fjords, which eternally sustained the colonists' lives. It is one of history's great mysteries, how the Viking colony survived until the 15th century and then suddenly vanished. The answer to this question, it turns out, is kept behind a door where the temperature is maintained at -25 degrees Celsius. In the refrigerator of the Geophysical Institute in Copenhagen, frozen history is preserved, ice and with samples. Ice, like a book, grows layer by layer over millennia. Researchers analyze a specific layer extracted from an ice core to obtain answers about the climate changes that occurred in that distant era. One such block of ice, found at a depth of 300 meters, contains invaluable information about the climate during the Viking Age. A significant difference is found between one piece of ice and another. Physical studies reveal physically distinct atmospheric deposits. Instruments count the heavy oxygen isotopes contained in the water. Numerous isotopes indicate a warm climate. Apparently, the climate was more temperate around the turn of the millennium, changing sharply around 1380, as the temperature curve clearly demonstrates. All sample curves yield the same result. The temperature dropped by half to 1 degree Celsius per year. This was enough for the Vikings from Iceland to establish a trade route with Norway in the 11th century, exporting desired goods there. Nevertheless, they likely dreamed of a better world, a place of wonders described by elders. Was this merely a figment of imagination, a fantasy born of cold and deprivation? Or was it reality, the American continent? The proof, supposedly, lies in the Yale University Library in Connecticut. A 15th century manuscript was intended to confirm that the Vikings reached America before Columbus. This parchment contains a world map, presumably drawn in 1440. On this map, Vinland is located next to Greenland, precisely where America is today. This was presented as evidence that America was discovered by the Vikings, named Vinland. However, serious doubts exist regarding the authenticity of the monk's document. The inscription on the map is made on a different type of 15th century paper. Is the map authentic? The markings on it have existed for a long time. However, chemical analysis showed that the ink used on the map was produced only after 1920. The $1 million map turned out to be a sensational forgery. The only genuine Viking relics found in the New World were discovered in a small settlement, specifically not on the American continent, but on the island of Newfoundland. A small weight, a copper fitting, a worked cork, these are the remains of a Viking settlement. Among the archaeological finds was a walnut that could not have been native to Newfoundland. But the main evidence is a bronze clasp. It could only have been produced by Vikings, as local indigenous peoples did not know the method of metal forging. This piece was likely forged in Lancex Meadows, as other metal items, such as ship rivets, were found at the same site. In this most remote location on the coast of Newfoundland, there were probably only 2 or 3 other huts. A small expeditionary team that arrived from Iceland in the 11th century likely could not withstand the attacks of local indigenous peoples for more than 2 or 3 winters. The Vikings, having abandoned this site, opened the American continent only in our imagination. Even if they touched the New World for only a short time, the spirit of adventure and the success of these seafarers allowed them to encompass the entire world of that era. Their network of trade routes and goods transformed Viking settlements into thriving colonies. A vivid example of a bygone era is the Hedeby colony, located on the Baltic Sea coast. Distinct evidence of the world that once surrounded and protected this important trading center has been preserved to this day. Researchers can trace the scale of this significant market, understand the daily lives of its inhabitants, and attempt to unravel the reason for Hedeby's sudden disappearance. This mystery, which may only be fully revealed by archaeology years from now, is actively being studied today by specialists conducting excavations at the ancient settlement. In their work, archaeologists use far more sophisticated tools than a simple shovel. Among them is a geomagnetic data calculator, or, as it's also called, a system capable of measuring the magnetic properties of soil. Thanks to this device, any change in the natural composition of the soil, be it a hidden structure or the tiniest metal fragment, is precisely registered and saved. This creates a detailed soil profile that can then be mapped with high accuracy. Even more precise results are promised by the use of ground-penetrating radar, GPR, an instrument capable of describing the differentiated geological structure of the soil layer. Part of this historical colony's territory has already been excavated, but scientists approach the untouched relics with extreme caution. While many archaeological questions are solved with modern technology, valuable finds, best preserved in their original location, under a preserving layer of soil, become visible on a computer screen. All acquired information is activated and combined, providing scientific returns that surpass the results of individual object excavations. Thus, a complete map of the ancient city, with its houses and streets, is formed on the monitor screen. Hedeby could not compare with the majestic metropolises of that era. Monumental structures were never erected here. Nevertheless, everything in this settlement was extremely practical and oriented towards the development of trade and craftsmanship. Approximately 1,000 people lived in simple but functional homes. The river that traversed the colony served simultaneously as a source of fresh water and a drainage ditch. The streets were carefully covered with wooden planks to prevent getting stuck in the mud. Hedeby, thanks to its rapid development, became a kind of Spartan trading paradise, while demonstrating impressive economic prosperity. From the modest homes, one could hear the voices of merchants speaking different languages, the clang of artisans' hammers, the joyful laughter of revelers from taverns, the squealing of pigs, all creating the unique atmosphere of a large rural metropolis. Here, virtually everything needed for life and trade could be found. Durable leather belts, fine fabrics, exquisite jewelry brought from distant lands reflecting Eastern fashion, precious salt, light goose feathers, heavy iron ingots, various weapons. Truly the full diversity of medieval goods. The Vikings, once humble farmers and solitary fishermen of the north, discovered an entirely new world, the world of international trade, which transformed them into fierce warriors. However, once international trade embraced them, the deadly axe was no longer as sought after. Jewels and other valuable goods became far more important than weapons. The irony of history is that at the peak of Viking culture, as a result of trade development, their conquests transformed into economic victories, and consequently, their unique national character gradually began to fade. This process led to the formation of separate nation-states. Scandinavians divided into Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes, and Germans, English, French, and Russians also emerged. But what happened to Hedeby, their greatest pride? There are many answers to this question. Today, a research vessel can be observed anchored opposite the area where the ancient trading metropolis once stood. The Baltic Sea level has risen significantly, and consequently, a large part of the colony is now underwater. Of particular interest to researchers is a large dam built in the 10th century. This massive wooden structure served as a reliable defense for the city against enemy attacks from the sea. Today, no visible traces of it remain, but its contours are detected using modern technical equipment. Side-scan sonar, actively used by scientists, is a highly sensitive detection device designed to survey the seabed surface. Can this sonar clarify why such a prosperous city disappeared? Divers, following the sonar's readings, descend to the bottom. The instrument's sound pulses penetrate the underwater sediment, transmitting precise, photographic-quality images of any objects hidden beneath a layer of silt. The diver meticulously prepares for his mission. He needs to collect fragments of the palisade. The main problem is not the rough sea, but the viscous, silty bottom. Water entering the breathing tube significantly reduces visibility, forcing the diver to find and collect objects solely by touch. The 1,000-year-old dam was meant to protect the sea entrance from enemies. However, in the mid-11th century, it could not withstand the assault. Who were these powerful enemies who managed to destroy the great city of Hedeby? Valuable timber samples recovered from the seabed can reveal a tree's age through its annual rings and the cause of a dam's destruction through its damage patterns. Such finds are invaluable treasures for archaeologists, as they help clarify complex historical connections. Though it also tells the story of the city's downfall. These particular fragments, for instance, belong to a sunken ship that archaeologists salvaged from the silt of Hedeby. It was a large, imposing vessel, seemingly responsible for the city's ruin. Burn marks on its hull allow for the reconstruction of the attack. The ship, recently captured by enemies, was loaded with highly flammable material, set ablaze, and, like a giant Molotov cocktail, steered directly into the dam. This fiery assault marked the beginning of Hedeby's demise in the mid-11th century. Recent astonishing discoveries shed light on a surprising historical aspect. The answer lies with the Vikings themselves. Norwegian Vikings clashed with Danish Vikings. This was an internal dispute among the Scandinavians, who had seemingly united to conquer a significant portion of the world. However, another colossal battle loomed, foreshadowing a bloody conclusion in the southern reaches of England. Once again, history repeated itself, Northmen against Northmen. The majestic 11th century artwork, rightly known as the Bayeux Tapestry, meticulously captures this grand catastrophe. Created by the skillful hands of nuns, it astonishes with its documentary realism, like a vivid report from the past. Its panels depict the preparations of the Norman Vikings. They diligently construct warships. King William of Normandy, destined to be known as William the Conqueror, mobilizes hundreds of vessels, preparing for a massive invasion. His objective, to attack Hastings and fight for the coveted English crown. In the summer of 1066, a powerful Norman fleet, comprised of countless ships, set sail from the shores of France. Their undeniable destination was the southern coast of England, with Hastings becoming the epicenter of the impending decisive battle. It was in this region that the war was destined to culminate in a truly bloody slaughter. On October 14, 1066, the two opposing armies clashed, a horrifying realism vividly conveyed in the ancient threads of the tapestry. The tapestry unsparingly depicts the brutal savagery of war. The bodies of wounded fighters are mutilated and torn apart. At that crucial moment of the battle, with the outcome still hanging in the balance, Harold received a fatal wound. An arrow pierced his eye. The fate of the battle was sealed. Harold's forces, deprived of their leader, were utterly routed. It was a true bloodbath, claiming the lives of the entire Norman nobility and the strongest men of an entire generation. With this fateful battle, fought in the autumn of 1066, a grand era concluded, one in which the united peoples of the North had held undisputed dominance over all of Western Europe. After all these upheavals and bloodshed, only an enduring myth remains. These are the tales and legends of the fearless Northman, much like the ancient saga of a warrior who summarized his Viking life in just 2 concise sentences. They convey profound wisdom and an acceptance of the inevitable, the end of everything. Even now Mel stands tall, waiting for life to depart, aware of his destiny, but without suffering or pain. This man was brave of heart. Thus concludes the narrative of a great era, leaving behind only echoes of heroic deeds and an unyielding spirit.